Good morning and welcome to the UCEA President Interview webinar. This is Alonzo Gilzine, Graduate Research Assistant and Doctoral Student at UCEA headquarters at Michigan State University. I'm here today to interview Dr. David DeMatthews as a part of his candidacy for UCEA President. Today, listeners will be hearing from Dr. DeMatthews, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy at the University of Texas at Austin. His research interests include school improvement efforts in urban districts, bilingual and inclusive education, and principal burnout and turnover. Welcome, Dr. DeMatthews.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say I'm truly honored for this opportunity. UCA means a great deal to me and has helped me a lot through my career, so I'm really excited to be with you today.
Thank you for being with us today. So let's start with the first question. Could you please tell us about your background and your scholarship as it relates to UCEA's mission and goals?
Sure. So I began my career in education as a teacher and then a school and district administrator. And then I started my career in academia at the University of Texas at El Paso. I'm currently an associate professor at UT Austin. At both institutions, I served as a plenum session representative. I've also been a liaison between UCEA and the Cedar Center at the University of Florida. I've engaged with aspiring faculty of color through the Jackson Scholars Network, helped to develop the NELP standards as part of a UCEA group, and I served on several UCEA awards committees over the past few years. And I've also served at my home institutions as program directors of an EDD program with a superintendent certification and also a master's program leading to a principal certification. And these experiences and my experiences in public education, they've provided me with what I think are unique insights into the future directions for how we prepare and support a diverse group of leaders in schools, but also professors and graduate students, which my experience with UCA is central to the organization's mission. And I do believe that these experiences have uniquely prepared me to serve as president because I think it will enable me to help the organization meet its goals and objectives in a rapidly changing educational landscape.
Thank you very much for that. So you alluded to this in your first answer, so I guess this is just more expansion, but discuss with us your scholarship, research projects, and teaching and/or service that can inform the work of UCEA, particularly the work of the executive committee.
Sure. I wish we had a lot more time, but there's two things that I really want to talk about today. So first, in relation to my research does really focus on how school and district leaders create more inclusive and socially just schools. And I have a background in special education and spent most of my career prior to joining academia in urban schools in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. And my time at University of Texas at El Paso and along the U.S.-Mexico border provided me with an added lens as I looked at bilingual education and the unique needs and assets of English language learners. So these experiences really prompted me to take an intersectional approach in my research in understanding how principals, district administrators, superintendents create more inclusive and equitable schools for all students while giving consideration to students and families from multiple identities. So I really do take an intersectional approach in my work. And a lot of that comes from my background as a practitioner, and then also the opportunities having to work in different cities and contexts over these years. And I know that this work is really central to supporting UCA's mission, given our collective vision for improving schools and outcomes for all students, but particularly students who have been marginalized by race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, immigration status, among other markers of identity. So I'm really passionate about that work and sharing that work with the UCA community because I think really school leaders and district leaders play such a critical role and we need to improve that pipeline. So my second line of research is actually related to that. What I was finding as I was studying schools that were doing just amazing things and had amazing teachers and school leaders and district support was that principal burnout and principal turnover was this looming equity issue that I didn't feel was being framed as an equity issue enough. So principal turnover is critical because from what I've seen in the research and in my own research is that it's a high level already, but schools that serve high proportions of low-income students of color, principal turnover is often higher, and burnout is a factor for turnover. And now, as schools deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, burnout is at an all-time high. And so, right now, I'm still interviewing principals as part of a study, understanding what it is that they're actually going through during COVID-19. And so, I know UCA is greatly concerned with having a diverse group of school and district leaders that can tackle today's most pressing issues, including racial justice, long-standing opportunity gaps, funding inequities, racial segregation. And at the crux of this work, it's not just effective practice, it's long-term sustainability on the job. So I've turned a lot of my attention to understanding principal burnout and turnover in all contexts. So not just urban, but also suburban and rural contexts, because the way in which our student populations are moving, there are great inequities across all three of these contexts, depending on where you look. And so I'm really excited about this work. I think it's critical to what UCEA does, and I'm hopeful that it can help make a difference.
Thank you very much for that. So for our next question, you served on the executive committee. Can you tell us about that experience and how it's prepared you for the UCEA presidency?
Sure. The executive committee is a great place to learn about the policies that govern UCEA and to work with a group of leaders from across the institutions to address some of the most critical issues that are raised in UCEA. My own former experiences have really helped me on the executive committee, having led certification programs, worked in public schools. Those things have really helped me and provided me with an opportunity to give voice to different types of universities, different types of programs, and different students. The UCEA EC has been especially focused since I've been on there in supporting the other UCA institutions, their faculty and their graduate students, especially right now as the nation is wrestling with police violence directed at Black people in particular, with racism and sexism in higher education, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the out-of-touch immigration policies enacted by President Trump that harm children and that have an impact on families and have an impact on schools, and therefore one of our constituencies, school leaders and district leaders. And so my experiences now in the EC, although there's a lot going on, the work is truly important. And as an EC, we've attempted to engage with our different partners, trying to share resources, revise policies, and continue to consider how UCA can best serve its institutions. And it's been a very difficult and complex set of work, but I think it's really important, and I think we're starting to make progress as an EC on these complicated issues.
Thank you very much for the answer. So for our last question, we want to ask, could you share the reasons why you've chosen to run for the UCEA president and your vision for the future of UCEA?
Sure. So there's one central reason that I want to run for president for UCEA. And UCEA has meant so much to me in my career. I wouldn't be where I am today if it was not for UCEA as an institution, and also for the many faculty who have mentored me up until this point and continue to do so. But I do believe we're at a critical reflection point, both in our country and also in the field of educational leadership and administration. I know from experience with UCA that our faculty and our graduate students share this common purpose to improve leadership pipelines and leadership practices that ultimately translate into improving schools. And I think we all want to see more inclusive and socially just schools, improve student outcomes, more innovative programs that aren't just about test scores, but build on the unique cultural assets of students and families. And they want to see schools that allow children to not just survive or maintain the status quo, but but thrive and excel in all aspects of their life. So I believe our constituency, we really have this common purpose, but I do think our field has many silos that limit our collective scholarly impact. And a lot of what UCA does is around scholarship and research. And so there are too many dividing lines right now, I think. There are quantitative versus qualitative oriented researchers working in silos, faculty and students who are more practitioner oriented versus more theoretically oriented, some of us who use critical theory versus some of us who use more traditional lines of theory and research. And I've sat in sessions with really passionate people where they're not mixing these conversations. So I see quantitative researchers talking about principal turnover and how it disproportionately impacts the education of low-income students of color. And then in another session, qualitative researchers identifying culturally responsive leadership practices in similar schools, yet I rarely see opportunities in our conferences and even in our scholarship outside of conferences where there can be dialogue and conversations across these two genres of research. So my vision for UCEA is to have a much more inclusive and collective dialogue centered around these issues. And I want to be president of UCEA in large part because I believe I can help bridge these divides. I was a practitioner and now I'm a tenured professor at UT Austin. I was a qualitative researcher and increasingly I'm doing quantitative work because of the questions I have, or I'm collaborating with folks and doing mixed method studies and pulling in practitioners, doctoral students, and faculty from across different disciplines within education and even outside of education. And so I think this is the most critical work for UCA moving forward in our conferences, in the white papers and advocacy we put out as we try to help shape education policy. And the second reason I want to be president of UCA is related to the current crisis in public education right now. So the world is experiencing a pandemic. Our schools, our children are out of schools and they're also watching police violence and civil and political unrest on television every day. Schools have not been well funded for decades, but now we're facing a significant recession, which is going to mean shrinking budgets. And often when education budgets decrease, it's low-income students of color and their schools that are disproportionately impacted. And so as president, I know as president or whoever's going to serve as president, I know that now is the time for UCA to build and expand coalitions, engage in targeted research that is going to tease out the inequities that have grown or been exacerbated during the pandemic, and advocate for equitable educational policies at all levels, at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And I think UCA can play a critical role in supporting UCA institutions, UCA faculty and students in doing that work in their own states and in their own locales, and also collectively at the federal level as a new administration enters in 2020. So I think UCA must be relevant in this work and engaged. And I'm running for president because I'm excited about the opportunity to serve during this very difficult and challenging time in education.
Well, thank you very much for your time and thoughtful responses, Dr. DeMatthews.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today.
No problem at all. So this interview will be made available to UCEA institutions and plenum representatives prior to UCEA's annual convention. Thank you.